It has come to my attention that Catalyst Game Labs are currently running multiple unfulfilled Kickstarter projects to raise cash whilst treating backers with utter contempt. Please don't support this company. Use 3D. Oh look, I found a Kickstarter. Hi. Yep, that's right, the Mercenary's release wave from Catalyst's brand new Kickstarter, which is allegedly, if you ask my comments section, an unfulfilled scam, is now like a whole ass shelf in my game store. And a massive wave of physical content, including a new giant boxed set, Alpha Strike campaign building material, new neoprene hex mats, including urban environments, the long-awaited conventional vehicular and armored assets, on top of a massive pile of new mechs and force packs for all factions in the game. I think that this expansion and its raucous success were well worth the delayed wait. Shit, the hardest part of this is going to be where indeed to start making video content. But if you asked me, after taking it all in at the game store and its massive mech glory, what part of the Mercenary Kickstarter has me most pumped, I gotta say it's the addition of something the game had limited quantity of before, but not nearly enough for the setting. That's right, piece of shit mechs. Take this Inner Sphere security lance. Most people probably weren't even aware mechs could have 4-leg configuration. I've never heard of the Vulcan. Nobody is ever gonna be on the market for a Jaeger mech. It's a strictly worst rifleman that melts if you so much as look at its rear arc run. Meanwhile, the Pursuit Lance has got the holy trinity of 40-ton shitboxes. The Cicada, which is the same firepower as a Locust for twice the tonnage and MSRP. Half the missions in Battletech felt like tracking down that one priority target, piloting this junk heap and sending his shit straight to the fucking stratosphere for merely existing. Not to mention the Hermes 2 being an undergunned frame, too heavy to play catch with the lighter mechs and too light to go to bat against anything starting at just 5 tons heavier. And of course, the topic of the video today, the Clint. Oh, the Clint. I haven't at this point in filming decided I want to paint the Clint. I'm also eyeing up the Dervish, which I had found a technical readout for from the Mech Warrior games and was very disappointed to find that there was no official CGL model until now. A quite inspired design, if a little ammunition heavy, alongside the Whitworth, which I have heard called the budget catapult. However, personally having used it in my Mercenary Lance running urban security across a grueling campaign in the Mega Mech application, I can personally testify that this mech, especially when outfitted in its dual SRM6 configuration, is an animal seldom matched at its weight bracket, even without jump jets to aid mobility. What made me, however, choose the Clint was dual purposed. On one hand, this is a very experimental video with a color scheme I had only conceptualized with paints I had never used and never executed even off camera, and two, I like the Clint. And it doesn't hurt that I'm not planning on using it in any force comp, so if this goes tits up, then that's how the 40-tonner crumbles from critical reactor containment breach. Looking at this sculpt, it's a very captivating, simplistic design, humanoid with a prominent autocannon, probably named for the movie icon himself.
We used to stack like you 5 feet high in Korea, use you for sandbags.
This mech can easily serve as a battle line soldier in the fires of the Secession Wars, just as much so as a cowboy bandit in the Wild West of the periphery. Sarnet.net has a series of articles of bad mechs, and they all have this cute art accompanying them. I like this one with the Clint and his poncho getting blasted by a far lighter, newer, and namely well-engineered Wolfhound. That's the Clint. It's just a neat little dude with a gun doing his very best in a world of better options. The sculpt itself is very admirable, crisp, and as noted before, every wave of Catalyst releases I see a trend of them tending to better their ability to conceal, if not eliminate, mold lines. This mech and many out of the same box is no exception. I'm particularly very impressed with the definition of the components on the back, such as the jump jets, heatsink fins, and other various greeblies, especially the fanned and toothed edges of the jump jet nozzles on the backpack here. They're very clear. Anyways, the first thing we're gonna do is just take this here and throw his ass in there and just stir him up a little bit. Yeah, just give him some good scrubbing action here. This does not hurt the mech whatsoever. After drying, we then take our super glue of choice. I am using Gorilla brand generic super glue formula with the blue cap, and just get a hardy coating over the base. You can then employ the use of a toothpick or popsicle stick to gently spread that around his base. Then, utilizing the tried and tested box of rocks, we just stuff him in there like so, and he makes like a 14-year-old high school student getting red pill on social media and comes out based. Now all we have to do is use this with these and get rid of the very minimal mold lining on this model. In fact, there was very little cleanup at all. Some light sanding on some surfaces to promote adhesion, pairing a couple mold flashes here and there, but that really was it. The newest phase of Battletech miniature releases is probably some of the cleanest out-of-the-box figures I've seen coming from a war game of this scale, and it's genuinely impressive. I don't think it's worth the $5 markup though. This box was $30 for 4 guys. I remember when Battletech Inner Sphere Lances were $20 and we're at $30 now, and that's unreasonable for a box that contains 0 heavy or assault mechs and no effects or special bases, unlike the Mercenary company boxes you see that started with having this price tag in the first place. This is the part of the video where you realize that I am neither sponsored by Catalyst Game Labs nor here to suck dick. I am just telling you my opinion. Our product looking like this, I just put a couple drops of super glue on the bottom of the base where I utilized that to affix a pair of 1/4 inch by 1/16 inch puck type magnets to the underside, as it will allow them to stick to magnetic rubber backing for display and carrier cases, or else something even lower tech like a T10. I scoot test it to ensure it sits flush, and then I am done. Never mind. I then realized that this mech has 2 antennas on its right hand side of the cockpit canopy head. I thought I'd have to use a ton of random bullshit, however I was able to get by through using a metal dental probe to press a pinhole in each antenna base, and then clipping the bristles off of our toothbrush. I use my oldest, gooeyest bottle of super glue I can find, where the glue is old and more viscous from drying out, and try my best to coat the base of each bristle, which is then individually stuck into their respective pinholes using some tweezers. This is not as easy as it sounds. You kind of want to hold them in place until they set a little, and then drip a slight amount of super glue over the attachment point to fix them in place, and then just leave it. Don't even f with it, just for like half an hour and you're good. Later, I can then trim them to size, and we are finally ready to get into the paint scheme for this guy. The recipe is very simple. For the armored carapace and its general camouflaged and weathered aesthetic, I am going for an alpine conifer forest look. To achieve this, I will be utilizing Army Painter 2.0 products and taking advantage of their color triad system. Starting off with breaking out the makeshift spray tint in my Paige TG Talon airbrush, which I hook up to its quick disconnect adapter. We're gonna shake our Fanatic 2.0 Fur Brown from the Ruddy Browns series to mix it, and then get some water in the feed cup of our airbrush and get a relatively heavy quantity of this Fur Brown in there after it. Mixing well with a toothpick and following up with a brief burst of air through the cup, we've hopefully converted this into a pretty consistent mixture, which we then tentatively give a spritz onto our model. This video isn't just trying new Battletech models, it's trying the new Army Painter 2.0 range, which up until this point I'm still fairly unfamiliar with. I went out of my way to get every single product for this video out of the Army Painter line from my game store, and I have to say, even though this Fur Brown utterly fails to color match with my original series Fur Brown, its mixing and coverage properties for a non-airbrush formulation out of the bottle are phenomenal, especially when applied to this mech. You can see how well it coats and saturates bare plastic with minimal effort, and really it's probably one of, if not the very fastest base coats I've ever done, really making sure to get the undersides, because that is all that will be visible of this color after a zenithal coat. Now, moving on to Army Painter's Patagon Pine to do exactly that. This bottle is brand new and sealed.
Oh, it's gonna be wet.
If you ever hear that sort of wetness as you crack it, that means it just overflowed through the nozzle, because the barometric pressure in your environment is substantially lower than where it was bottled. And with our first pass, wouldn't you know, 2 for 2, this paint is also badass for coating miniatures quickly and efficiently. It's also going over a fairly reddish brown, which is not necessarily the most ideal undercoat for green to cover on the first pass, and yet here we are. The idea of this coat is that we are communicating a sort of rusted undercarriage effect upon the mech. If there's one thing I know about alpine and high altitude regions in general, is that machinery rusts very quickly, not because of the natural conditions, but because roads, pavement, and tarmacs are consistently consistently salted to prevent the icing of terrain, prohibiting transport and creating unsafe conditions. As a result, if you ever work in the automotive trade, the two regions you can expect to see the rustiest components such as wheel hubs, studs, and frames is coastal and oceanic areas, and ironically, places far above and away from salty sea level. And let me tell you something, with just 2 paints and a very abbreviated space session, very abbreviated spray session, this model's definition is already popping from the contrast, which I will now accentuate tenfold with our Army Painter Fanatic Strong Tone. Perhaps this lengthy but satisfying to watch process is the best time to explain to those curious maybe why the Clint is so widely considered a subpar mech, though it may surprise you to learn that from a tabletop perspective that the CLNT2-3T Clint is a fairly serviceable mech, packing in its most common iteration an AC5 and 2 medium lasers, jump jets, and respectable mobility and armor figures. It is certainly no slouch as far as a role as a heavy scout and skirmisher. The problems arise from a research and development and especially a procurement angle. See, the Clint was designed to secure a Star League era contract for an inexpensive intermediate reconnaissance mech for patrolling the fringe periphery states only so recently brought into compliance by the League and its member states. Andoran Industries Limited managed to underbid every other contractor in the running with their design dubbed the Clint, selling the individual units at a figure which indeed approached almost a loss for the company. One which was craftily compensated for and made up by the fact that a good many of components inside this mech, primarily essentials like servos and motors, but most critically its gyro, which is the computational unit which allows a mech to orient itself and stay standing, were proprietary goods which only they held the rights for production and maintenance. This effectively meant the real angle of the Clint as a model was profit through repair fees and leveraging unfairly high prices for parts you literally can't find anywhere else, which was a solid enough strategy before the dissolution of the Star League, but after the Great Exodus and the consequential First Secession War destroying many critical production and fabrication facilities, including the ones in the Andoran system, the already difficult to come by parts for the Clint began to enter virtual extinction, and in many cases Clints would survive their service now to periphery states or underfunded successor factions having bought or secured these models as a considerable markdown from the League in years past through creative text, jury-rigging, standardized servos, and other components in the systems for easier repair. More complicated systems such as the gyro, however, unfortunately exist beyond the skills of most techs to reconfigure or replace, meaning if you take an unfortunate critical hit to your torso and lose your gyro, your Clint is it's a brick. It's no good. There is no coming back from that, and good luck finding another one. One drying time lapse later, and diggity darn shucks, it is looking like a real weathered and well-defined piece. Utilizing a cheap dollar store makeup brush and an unthinned splotch of Patagon pine smaller than a pea, I get some onto the very ridge of my bristles, ensure that the most of it is dispensed with a circular motion rubbing onto a paper towel, and gently, lightly feathering our model with the very fringes of the brush to get an easy, low-effort, dry-brushed edge highlight. We break out mossy green from the same color triad. You see that there are indeed 6 brackets of paint tone and not 3 as the name triad would suggest. This allows you to pick a paint in the middle of the scale like Patagon and go a number of spaces up or down to suit your needs for either deepening or brightening your miniature without altering the color value and pigmentation formula as much as the brightness. I think the real magic of the Clint for me is that its terrible acquisition and sales strategy doesn't affect 99% of players, as it would only come into play in campaign rules of repairing mechs after a firefight scenarios, something most players aren't interested in playing. It's that the writers took time to explain a legitimate reason a piece of equipment is so problematic in a way that would never affect anyone, but does that much more to broaden the scope and realism of the setting that is Battletech, and that makes me happy. That second edge highlight should be even gentler and lighter than before, and we have now a very well detailed little guy. Appreciate that this is like 90% of the work we're going to do on this model, by the way. The next thing, however, is coating some detailed bits with Army Painter Fanatic Mithril Metallic. We shall pick out the backside breech of the autocannon with its neat little disc shapes, then this underside cover here, and of course the very distinctive muzzle brake. One of the things I dislike about Army Painter is the objective inferiority of their metallics. Vallejo metallics are generally, from my research, considered industry standard, but even a pot of Citadel metallic paint is going to go a longer way with how many fewer coats of metallic paint you'll have to stick on even smaller bits like this I often found myself going back twice for a second coat. It may not be distinctive here, but on models with larger details and surface areas, it is very noticeable the poor coverage of every Army Painter metallic I've used. After getting all our jump jets, something I'll notice how hard it is to, even with a fine detail brush like this, get between the legs to do details on the inside of the limbs. It was not easy getting some of these servos on the inside knee and ankle joint. I got this cute little dot on his forehead, but had to rinse off my brush and wet it again with just water so I could scratch off some extra silver I got on his head where it wasn't supposed to be. I then moved on and got his 2 medium lasers in his chest, and then very carefully the individual grills on this vent in his chest plate here. You can of course get whatever random bits you find necessary that tickle the snail in your ear, which keeps telling you to go goblin mode for miniatures. The original plan was to also use strong tone for the rust effects on the metal, but I didn't like it, so I washed it off with a wet brush before I dried and then switched to Fanatic 2.0. Rust tone. This isn't a redux of an old wash, it's a new feature and I like it quite a bit. As you can see, it really gets a good picture of what oxidization on metal parts look like. Believe me, I know I look at rust all day and buff it out very frequently. When I think there's too much on a bit here or there, I just wet my brush and soak up some of that extra wash out. I also do what frat boys in their freshman year do when they're completely sozzled and just want to make into the fraternity by trying a little streaking. With the paint, I did not streak for this video. Anywhere with vents or openings, got some gentle downward motion with just a little bit of that wash to simulate moisture being drawn out of the system, perhaps with a little bit of salt, wearing away that protective paint coat to the metal underneath. I then came back with some of that brighter mossy green and get just the smallest amount of it rather wet with my pipette dropper, and after thoroughly stirring, clamping a loose bit of sponge between some needle nose tweezers, and gently stipling on some spattered grainy paint chipping effects all over the edges of the mech. This simulates paint chipping. Like, I don't know what the else you want me to say. Like, you fucking dumb. Using a fractional amount of fur brown and a brush that comes to an acceptably fine point, I then dot a little bit of that brown in the middle of those bright spots. This is to communicate that the paint has completely worn down to the metal in these pockmarked areas and then rusted to brown. Furthering this effect back with rust tone wash, I get some on and then clean and wet my brush and gently daub most off. The product looks excellent. This is to 90% of people playing tabletop probably acceptable, unless you're me because I'm mentally fucking ill, holy shit. So I'm going to get some effects done with the full potential of the Army Painter Triad system by its intended purpose, utilizing 3 colors. Originally supposed to be these vivid blues here, but they're irrelevant because it took me a minute to decide that these 3 from the oranges category was a better contrast with the green. Our first is going to be this dark base. It's burning ore. One of the problems that I have with the nozzle tips in the Army Painter bottles is that they kind of get cloggy sometimes if you squeeze them too hard. That literally happened exactly where I thought I was going to go. Anyways, using our adequately and precisely proportioned quantity of orange paint, I use a regular ass brush, not even like a detail brush, and went straight in, filling in the 3 panels of the cockpit canopy glass. I then immediately grabbed a popsicle stick and made a concerted effort to mitigate material losses before cleaning my palette cup and moving on to the second intermediate layer color, Glowing Inferno, getting most of the panels once again, just leaving the edges filled in with the darker orange. Finally, with the very brightest orange, which is basically ascended to yellow. That's yellow. If I color grab this and then put this on the screen, what color is this? Yeah! Army Painter's Fanatic 2.0 Inner Light as a highlight color, and just very carefully dot the very center of each panel to get this glow effect. But we're not done, because I was at the store and I got a couple of these fluorescent paints such as Army Painter Fanatic 2.0's Radiation Glow from the effects line, and I had to use it because at the end of the day, I mean, the snail told me to. After getting just a little bit of my palette and then faintly on my model, I realized it's pretty transparent, so I got more and went in heavier, and yeah, as a fluorescent, it really accentuates that glow effect I have going on with the head. Just a little bit of touch up now. I take some strong tone and darken the exhaust ports of each jump jet in the legs, and then with more inner light and what is actually my designated detail brush now, I carefully dot the interiors of each laser port and follow up with the second fluorescent Army Painter Fanatic Data System Glow Effect paint. That was a mouthful. Which really serves to make those little energy weapons stand out on the model. That's a wrap. All we gotta do now is, of course, look at it. Yeah, it's a very impressive figure for an ad hoc, spur of the moment in the game store formulated scheme, which I had no reference for whatsoever. However, for the Mercenary company scheme, which I am trying to make manifest for my ideal army, it's close but not quite the forest or woodland camouflage scheme that I am looking for. This is a bit bleached. I think I did too good a job weathering it, if anything. This looks like vintage US vehicles, like a Sherman tank that spent its entire life out of the Son of the North Africa campaign, bleaching its coat, or even some gunner power armor or body armor kit for if you were painting a wasteland warfare band that's rocking gear which has been banging around since the Atomic War 200 plus years ago. And it's certainly a great scheme for a mech, which I might even fill out some spares to match as a lance, and I hope it's one which you have come to appreciate, enjoy watching, and maybe picked up a thing or two as far as knowledge. This, of course, is good for you because I'm going to keep making camo spec videos until I get exactly what the snail wants. But until the little fucker stops whispering sweet nothings into my ear, feel free to scroll down and like the fucking video that you've been watching for like 20 minutes now. Like, I'm not your dad, but holy shit, what does a guy gotta do these days? Fuck.